So if you watch my video on the Rolex Air King 5500, I said that watch was the king of budget Rolexes. Well, I'm changing my mind. The Rolex Speed-King, this is the king of budget Rolexes. This is pretty much the cheapest Rolex you can buy on the market today, secondhand. So let's dive into it. Let's talk about that price because that's probably the biggest catching point of this Rolex. How much is this watch? Well, it depends on the condition. It depends on actually several factors. You can see that this watch does not come in its original bracelet. It actually comes in this very poorly taken care of strap, which I should probably change it. But watches like this can go for about, 1,000 to 1,500 USD, which is like super, super cheap. That's about, 1,300 to like 1,800 Canadian dollars. So super cheap. An Air King would cost like 3,000 Canadian dollars. So a Speed King, think of it as like half the price of an Air King. So that's a really big appeal, especially for people that, if you just want the Rolex branding, or if you just want to start somewhere, you want to start with a nice Swiss watch brand, why not start with Rolex? You might think you have to start with Tissot, or I don't know what else is Swiss. I think Hamilton is now Swiss, because it used to be American, but Hamilton is Swiss, Tissot is Swiss. But with this, sub, $1,000, $1,500 Rolex, you can start with a Rolex. And this one here, you can see it's in quite good condition. So that itself is a reason to buy the Rolex Speed-King. This is the true king of affordable Rolex. I don't think you can really go any cheaper than this unless you go with purely a female Rolex, like a 28, 24 millimeter, Rolex lady watch. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. Let's get that out of the way. It's a super affordable Rolex. Now the second thing, and you can probably tell just like based on the video, I usually point my camera pretty close to the watch so you can see the details, but you can't really see it because this is a 30 millimeter watch, which is quite small, especially in today's standards. Actually, in today's standards, even women's watches come in, 32, 34. Some women will wear, a 40 or a 42 millimeter watch now. So this is comparatively small, but would you believe me if I told you it actually doesn't wear that small? So let me put on my wrist first, and I'm gonna hope that this strap doesn't break because this is a very, very old strap and I should probably change it, but I couldn't find another strap in time for this video. But I have a 6-inch wrist, by the way, so keep that in mind, but I don't think it actually looks that small. I'm going to put the lug-to-lug dimensions in the description below, but it doesn't actually look like a tiny watch. It is small, like don't get me wrong, this is a small watch, but it kind of fits the dress watch vibe, right? You want a watch that isn't ginormous for a dress watch. And let me post a side shot comparison just to show you that, if you're just passing someone on the streets, if someone sees you with this watch, it doesn't look, ridiculously tiny, in my opinion. It fits pretty well. And then, when someone says like, hey, that looks like a vintage watch on your wrist, like, can I see it? They will see this watch. They'll see a Rolex Oyster Speed-King. And, if you're someone like me, you want a watch that's kind of different and unique. How many people have Oyster Perpetual 34? In terms of vintage watches, they'll have an Oyster Perpetual, an Air King, but a Speed King, there's not that many out in the market. And thankfully, because there's not that many, the chances of this being fake, if you see this on eBay or, watch forums, it's a lot less, Even watches, especially like a Datejust or a Submariner, I mean, those ones will be super faked. But watches like old Datejust, an old Oyster Date, old Oyster Perpetual, they might change the dial, but for a 30 millimeter watch, you really don't see that many fakes out there. I also just want to add a quick note about authenticity. So one thing that's really common with Rolex is that, there's this fear that the watch is going to be fake. And this is especially common when you don't have, like box and papers, meaning like the original box and like any certificates of authenticity. Now, the thing is that boxes and those certificates can also be faked, but of course that just adds a little extra layer of security. So I actually bought this watch and it didn't have any box or papers, which honestly, like that's pretty expected because this watch is probably from the 1950s. So that kind of begs the question of, okay, well, how do I know that this is a real Rolex, which is fair? So a few things that I can look at. If you look at the case between the lugs, it's supposed to say like the mall number and the mall year, or it's, yeah, mall number. But this one you can see that it's kind of just rubbed off over the years, which again, it's kind of to be expected for a watch that's like 70, 80 years old. So can't look there. Then you can just get the overall, just the impression of the watch. Like you can kind of get a feeling of the case, you know, Rolex cases on the side, it kind of like tapers down. The case back is appropriate for the era. The crystal, again, it's kind of like a dome shape. This is pretty typical of vintage Rolexes. Then you can just look at the dial. You know, a watch of this age, if it was in perfect condition, you know, no patina, no like signs of wear and tear, I'd be kind of suspicious that it was a redial. But again, you can see that the markers, the hands, they all look quite old. And you can look at the crown here. Again, this is a screw down crown. You can see the threads are, you know, they look kind of old. So that's kind of what you look for when you decide whether a watch is authentic or not. You know, you look at, even here, just a quick side note, the brushing of the lugs here. These are all signs that this is an authentic Rolex. And there's always going to be some degree of whether or not something's genuine or not. You know, but if you buy anything online, you know, there's never a 100% guarantee, but these are just the things that I look for to make sure that the watch is authentic. And just to conclude this talk about authenticity, I ended up taking this watch to a watchmaker to get it unofficially verified. And you can see here that it is a Rolex Speed-King 6421 with the caliber 1215. So it looks like I did indeed buy an authentic Rolex. Original case back, which you can see it's flat because this is a manual hand winding movement. Not chronometer, unfortunately, because you can see it says precision, but I don't think that matters. You know, it's such an old watch. You're not going to get chronometer level ratings anyways. It is a nice watch. And let's talk about that next. I think this watch looks pretty nice. And not only does it look nice, it feels nice. Again, the strap doesn't feel nice. This is some random third-party strap, but this this watch feels nice. And that's the thing about Rolex is that, you know, nowadays they're all like super luxury, but from what I understand, you know, they were still on the side of kind of like tool watches back in the 1950s. But even then, like they were well-built watches. Like feeling this watch, you know, feeling the case and the crystal, you know, looking at the dial, the case back, the crown, like you can tell that this was a decently made watch back in the day. And I really appreciate that. I've held watches from, you know, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. They don't feel as good as this Rolex. And maybe it's because, you know, this watch was kept in better condition, which is a fair point to make. But I think overall, Rolexes really hold their value. Sorry, I mean, yes, they hold their value, but they're just durable. You know, I feel like this watch could run for another 50 years with no issue. You know, it's just such a high quality watch. And I think that's why Rolex has made its reputation. You know, part of it's marketing and advertising and maybe like the illusion that it's really good quality, but you know, faking it can only go so far. I think that this watch and this brand, they really did earn the respect of people because their watches are so durable. So another thing I want to note though, just a side comment, all Rolexes have a screw down crown, threaded crown. This is meant for, I believe, you know, water resistance. You don't want to pull open the crown by accident when you're underwater. The problem is that, you know, this is like a screw, and the threads can get stripped, and it's really, you know, it's kind of annoying when the threads are stripped, and then this will be permanently jutted out. So I actually don't like threaded crowns in the long run because eventually these threads will strip. You know, for some watches, it might take 20 years, 40 years, 60 years, but eventually you would have to replace the crown. So let me pull it out and just show you how to adjust the time. So again, there's no date wheel. This watch, yeah, it does not have hacking, but again, this is a watch that's very old. I want to say this is 1950s. And to me, if it's a watch from the 1950s, if it's, as old as my grandparents, I'm just happy that it's still running. So let's go ahead and screw it in. Again, I'm being careful. I don't want to strip the threads even more. So just to summarize what we talked about today, the Rolex Speed-King. What can I say about it? 1, price. Cheapest Rolex you can buy. And cheap does not mean bad quality. It does mean small, but it doesn't mean bad quality. But speaking of size, yes. So you do sacrifice size. It's 30 millimeters, which, in today's standards, if you saw a 30 millimeter watch, you would say, okay, that's not for males, that's more for smaller wristed people, like for women. But, I think it still works, even though it's small. Dress watches can be smaller on men. And I feel like it fits my 6-inch wrist well. Your mileage may vary if you have like a 7.5-inch wrist, but for those people like me who have smaller wrists, 30 millimeters still works pretty well. And last but not least, cheap price does not mean cheap quality. You still get that Rolex level quality, the case, the crystal, the dial, I don't know about the movement, it's not a chronometer movement, but I'm assuming the movement is robust. So even though it's cheap and it's small, the quality is still there. And so that's why, Rolex watches are so popular. They kind of gain their reputation. Let me just get this on my wrist one more time just to show you, what it feels like. Obviously, I'll say it one last time. The strap sucks, but this watch just feels so nice on the wrist. Like, it doesn't feel tiny to me. I don't know how to put it. I know people have described that for 34 millimeter vintage Air Kings and Oyster Perpetuals. They've said that those watches wear larger than what the dimensions suggest. I feel like that the Speed-King kind of feels the same too. It really feels like, it can take the wrist, even though my wrist is small anyways, but it doesn't seem too small. And I think for those who are starting off with Rolex, you're really interested in the brand. You don't care about getting a giant Submariner or a Datejust. You just want to start, with a historical piece. This is perfect. And, I feel like I would give this to, who would I give this to? I'm not sure. Someone who's looking for a dress watch. Maybe, a high school student about to graduate. They want a graduation present. Why spend money on, I don't know, some other watch when you can get a Rolex for $1,000 US or about, 1,500 Canadian. So that's it for this video. I was really excited to talk about this watch just because, I don't see that many videos on the Speed-King on the internet. I hope that now you can kind of see, if you're looking for affordable Rolex, there are some other alternatives. So thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more videos. And as always, I will see you guys next time.